The beast that was civilization ever faced forward, and in making its present world, it devoured the world to come. It was an appalling truth that one's own children could be so callously sacrificed to immediate comforts. Yet this was so, and it had always been so. Today, I'm reviewing Dust of Dreams, the 9th book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Steven Erikson. And before I review this book, which will contain just a boatload of spoilers, I want to take time to apologize for not reviewing this book sooner. I have been sitting on this review for months and reviewing a ton of other stuff in the meantime. I'd like to say that there's like some really good excuse for that, but my only reason is I just did not really want to review this book because I didn't really love it. I had some major issues with Dust of Dreams. I am not the biggest fan of this book, and unfortunately, even some time away from this novel has not improved it. I've become more okay with the fact that I didn't like it, but it hasn't necessarily improved in my opinion. And I've been really figuring out how I want to review this, and of course, like, life got busy. I was reading other stuff, so like I just kept pushing it back. But I finally decided that I would like to review Dust of Dreams. The Malazan fans who follow me deserve a Dust of Dreams review, especially because I want to review The Crippled God, and I want to eventually review the other Malazan books by Esselman, and even the other Erikson books. So I felt like I just need to do this. So this is my review. I wrote down what I remember from Dust of Dreams. This is not going to be perfect. This is not going to be nearly as in-depth as some of my other reviews for this series, and I apologize for that. It's been way too long for me to remember everything, but I'm just going to kind of go over what I liked, what I didn't like, and just talk about like my general feelings about this book in general. And then as soon as I'm done with this video, I'm going to try and do the same for The Crippled God. So I hope you guys enjoy, and thanks for watching my content. So let's begin with the stuff that I liked, because despite Dust of Dreams being my personal lowest in the Malazan series, it does have some good stuff going for it, and I never want to deny the fact that Erikson is a good writer. While he may not be my favorite, Erikson is undoubtedly a genius, and Malazan is deserving of its praise. It is, for many, a masterpiece, and while I maybe not can call it that, I do think it is a great work of fiction. So let's talk about some of the good stuff, right? First of all, the Deck of Dragons sequence in the first part of this book is absolutely awesome. You have Tavaray gathering with all these other really important characters, Fiddler and the other bone hunters, and obviously Fiddler lays out the Deck of Dragons cards, and we are just kind of subjected to this very weird and very intense exchange of magic and examination for the upcoming future. Now, I'm sure if I ever reread this series, this sequence would probably make way more sense to me, but I distinctly remember this not making a whole lot of sense. But despite it not making a whole lot of sense, I still really enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed the Deck of Dragons sequences because they're kind of like, they feel almost like dream sequences in other stories, if you know what I mean. Like, Wheel of Time has like dream sequences where it's like predicting the future or whatever. And it kind of feels like that, where it's someone predicting the future, and you can almost, like, I feel like if you're smart enough, you can almost guess what's going to happen in upcoming scenes in the book based on what those cards are saying. Now, me personally, I was not picking up on that, but intellectually, I know that's available, especially for those who reread this series. But I don't know, I always liked the tarot card reading aspect. I always thought that was a very interesting, very almost D&D mechanic by Erikson, and I always thought it played well. As for like just the beginning sequence of this, anything with the Bone Hunters is going to be awesome. The Bone Hunters, any scene with them I'm going to enjoy it. You know, when they were introduced in House of Chains, I was not the biggest fan. I wanted more time with the bridge burners. I really didn't like the fact that they kind of picked up that mantle, it felt like, and House of Chains, you know, it had issues for me, and the Bone Hunters was a major part of that. But, you know, 4 books later, my mind was changed, and I came to love the dynamics and relationship that the Bone Hunters had with one another. I think Malazan, for me, is at its best when it's characters just having conversations with one another, and especially the military characters. I am a huge fan of that kind of stuff. I love action. I love, world building and all of that, but I am always going to be a sucker for just really good dialogue and character building parts and character dynamics and all those. And that is something Erikson does exceptionally well throughout the entire Malazan Book of the Fallen series. He is very good at making two characters speak to one another. And whether it be philosophy or just how terrible the world is, it doesn't really matter. No matter what the subject is, Erikson excels at just making them some very convincing characters. And even the characters who kind of feel like mouthpieces at time can be very, very enjoyable. So any sequence with the Bone Hunters is going to be just absolutely phenomenal. And I just, like, the first quarter of this book, I was really into it. I was like, yes, all the things that I heard about Dust of Dreams, completely wrong. And I thought the entire start of this in Lethri was just really, really, really solid. So I'm going to skip the middle section because I didn't like that as much and go kind of towards the end, because the final fight, the final last 2 chapters of Dust of Dreams is why, despite all of my issues with it and how much it kind of, if I'm being honest, repulsed me while reading, I gave this a positive review. And that would be the final fight with Gessel and Stormy leading the Kachane Chamal against the other Kachane Chamal. The short tails versus the long tails. That sequence with, the floating ships and them coming down and just, killing other dinosaur sword wielding dinosaurs. Genius. I mean, there is no other series I can think of that comes close to those kinds of ideas. And I thought the ending was incredible. I love the Kachane Chamal throughout this book, actually. Out of all the plot lines, I think the Kachane Chamal and what happens with them in Dust of Dreams is probably my overall favorite, because they are so distinct and so different from every other race that we're introduced to in the Malazan universe. They don't communicate in any sort of normal way. It's all about, the glands and the scents and the smells, and it's almost like they're speaking telepathically to one another, and there's this whole brood mother thing. And I really like it, because when we're first introduced to them, all the way back in Memory's Vice, we think, wow, this is like a horrible race of just cold-blooded killing, monsters, just monsters. And that's not really what they are at all. In fact, you could say the Kachane Chamal are these unsung heroes throughout the history of the Malazan universe, and they are some of the first people who stood up against the Forkrow Assail. It's amazing kind of what Erikson was able to achieve with that race and that group of people. I really like the Ikariam stuff in this book. I feel like the more I've thought about, the more I've come to terms with what Ikariam is as a character, and I like his spot in this book, and I kind of like the way he just shows up, and it feels like he saves the day for Stormy and Gessel. I like the fact that Erikson uses this book to espouse this philosophical idea of human extinction, even though I am not someone who agrees with the philosophy or the thinking or why or how he uses it in this book, if that makes sense. I like the fact that he challenges me despite me not enjoying the challenge itself. And that seems contradictory, but I like the fact that we kind of sit with this idea of human extinction, and we kind of examine why maybe human extinction could be a good thing. Why maybe hitting that reset button would be ideal for most of the world, and why the Fork Sail and these elder gods are kind of even coming up with this idea. And despite the very grim nature of this book, which I was not like the biggest fan of, and I'll talk about very, very soon, and the just kind of overly cynical view it has towards humanity, and just how horrible humans are in this book, there's still some stuff that I just... There's something about his philosophy that it even if you don't like it, you're going to be intrigued. You're going to kind of like think about it for a while, and that is something that Malazan does very well. It's a series that's dense, and it always makes you think. So that's a positive in my opinion. And finally, the last thing I really like about this book is just the Fork Sail in general. What an awful race. What an awful group. Their entire introduction, what they are, who they are, and the hints that we have gotten throughout the entire series about where this series was leading to them being the ultimate villains, just genius. I mean, Fork Sail are among my favorite villains in any fantasy series ever. Like they're so good because they're so despicable. It's hard not to hate them, but like that's kind of the genius. Erikson really gave us some villains throughout the series, but especially towards the back half that I loved. And the Fork Sail, they're really good villains, and I'll talk about them more, I think, in the Crippled God review. But I love their how their magic works. I love like their kind of what they are and what they represent. I just think they're really solid villains, to be honest. But yeah, that's generally the stuff I liked. There's obviously a ton I'm missing, mostly the middle section. But I'm gonna talk about more of that in the cons, because there unfortunately is some stuff that Dust of Dreams didn't really work for me. And the first thing that I want to talk about that didn't quite work for me in this book was the pacing. Malazan is a very long series, millions of words. Each one of these books is like 500 pages or longer, and Dust of Dreams, I think, is over 1,000 pages. At least in my mass market paperback edition, it's over 1,000 pages. And I've never been bothered by reading this series for how long these books are. I've always thought the pacing was steady, if not perfect. There have always been sections in each Malazan book where I've not enjoyed a certain character, or I didn't enjoy a certain section as much as the rest. But it felt like a minor amount of time focusing on things I didn't really like. And, pacing is always subjective, but for me, with Dust Dreams, it felt like because of the stuff we were focusing on, the pacing was really sluggish. It felt like I was dragging myself through the desert, which is probably exactly what Erikson wants you to feel like while reading this book. It's not some really hopeful, epic narrative. I mean, it is epic, but it's certainly not hopeful. And you feel that. You feel that while reading it. It definitely sets the tone and sticks to it. There's no doubt about it. But for me, because of that, it suffered. And the specific plot lines that really kind of sucked to read for me, and I do really mean that. Like, I didn't enjoy reading them, was the Shake plot line and the Snake plot line, and even the White Barghast. First of all, I'll start with the Shake because they're less of a problem, especially when it comes to how they come about in the Crippled God, which, again, I'm going to talk about that later. I'm going to talk about it in the next video. But the Shake here, I felt like we were just wandering around for no reason. I'm just gonna be honest. I understand retrospectively why this plot point had to happen. I understand. And I will say, in The Crippled God, it completely changed my mind. But this is a review for Dust of Dreams and Dust of Dreams only, all right? So I'm only talking about how I felt reading it in that moment. And I have to say, in that moment, the Sheikh, I was not really interested in them. I was not really interested in the watch guy. I wasn't interested in his sister. I just wasn't. Who cared about this weird group of people that were just randomly introduced? I want to read about the Bone Hunters. I want to read about anything but this. And that it just dragged, man. It just dragged so much. But I will say that this plot point was redeemed later. So, despite me not liking it while reading it, I get it now. I do want to say that. I get it now. And I have good things to say about it in The Crippled God. All right? I promise. Second is the snake plot line with the children. Children dying has been a major theme in Malazan since at least Dead House Gates, right? It is an essential part of Erikson's idea where he is attempting to make proclamations and examine humanity in this series. That's what Malazan's about, really. It's about, why do we treat each other like this? It's kind of, I feel like it's Erikson's examination of human history and his reaction to it, both good and bad. Sometimes it's really cynical, sometimes it's very optimistic, and The Snake is no exception to that. It is a bunch of children wandering through the desert, slowly starving and dying of thirst. Now, I can't speak for other people, but yes, on a philosophical level, makes perfect sense. It's thematically rich. But just because something is thematically rich for, in a book, does not mean I'm going to enjoy reading it. And no matter what people argue, the Snake plotline to me was not only hard to get through because it's children suffering, but it was incredibly dull. And I get that's the point of what Erikson's trying to do. He's trying to, be like, we should focus on this, but we focus on all the other kind of like explosions and the distractions in the world. I get what he's going for on a meta level. But for me, it just doesn't work. Because, like, in real life, when you hear about children suffering, your eyes go to that immediately. Maybe this is just my biased worldview, right? This is me examining it too much. But to me, usually, I feel like when children are suffering, we as people focus on that a bit more, right? I'm not saying we always react to it the best. I'm not even saying we always try and fix it, but we at least focus on it. We usually don't divert our attention from it. Usually that is the focus, right? And it just feels like Erikson kind of missed that for me. I don't know. I really wasn't a fan, to be honest. I thought it was really dull to read. I thought it was really boring. And I thought that exact same thing in how it was kind of talked about in Dead House Gates was much, much better. I thought it was much more thematically rich in Dead House Gates. And this, it felt like beating a dead horse. That's my opinion. And finally, the last thing that really kind of tipped me over the edge for why I didn't like this book was the White Barghast and Hetton plotline in this. Malazan is a grim series. It's not grim dark. I don't like that term. But it is a very dark series. I knew that going into this. I knew that there were going to be sequences I wouldn't enjoy. But, as someone who doesn't necessarily enjoy reading sexual assault, Hetton bothered me. And, there are obviously other series that I have praised that have sexual assault. A Song of Ice and Fire is one of my favorite fantasy series, and it has sexual assault. The Dark Tower, one of my favorite series. It has sexual assault. But my issue with what Erikson does is the repeats and the continuous re-examination of sexual assault throughout this series. It happens in Dead House Gates. Pretty sure it happens in Memories of Ice. Pretty sure it happens in House of Chains. Might be wrong about that. I'm almost certain it happens in Bone Hunters. I know for a fact it happens in Reaper's Gale. And it might have happened in Toll the Hounds if I remember correctly. I understand that Erikson is trying to examine a real world issue. I understand that this is something that really does happen. And we need to, as a society, prevent it from happening. Nobody's gonna argue that. Especially not me, right? But to just continue to have this happen to a bunch of your characters, your female characters in fantasy, and just sit in it. I don't know, man. There's something about it that bothers me. The constant reopening of that wound, maybe it just bothers me. And the way that it is dealt with Hetan, just, I didn't like it. I really did not like it. I don't care if it's some sort of real historical practice. I thought it was overly graphical and an unnecessary scene. I think you could have achieved the same detest for the White Bard Ghast with a cut to black scene or an innuendo or a hint, but the just close approximation to it, it really, when I read it, it really soured my taste for the entire series. I mean, every time it was happening, it kind of soured me a little bit. But, this one especially, I was not a fan. I really wasn't. So, yeah, it just, I understand why it's there. I understand the meta commentary and the philosophy and all the reasons that Erikson put it here. It's supposed to be this examination of, do we as a society, should we, say that other cultures are worse than ours? Should other cultures that do these horrible practices exist? Should they not? Etc. I get all that intellectually, but reading it was not an enjoyable experience. I really, really didn't like it, and it's actually like one of the worst things I've ever read in fiction. One of, not the worst, but it's one of. It's up there. So yeah, Dust of Dreams had a few things for me that it really soured me on this book. And especially for how long it was, I felt like not enough was achieved in this book. I felt like this book was definitely a prop up for the Crippled God, especially with the philosophy and the examination of violence and extermination and all of that. And I get it, that is the point. But for me, this is me telling on myself, obviously. But I as much as I enjoy that in fantasy, it shouldn't be the priority. Theme should never take priority over plot for me. Plot should drive theme. Theme shouldn't drive plot. That is my opinion. And Dust of Dreams is very much the theme driving the plot and focusing on those things. And it just, for me, it didn't work in this book. Toll the Hounds is my favorite, which is also very theme-driven, so maybe I'm a hypocrite, but there's just something fundamentally missing in Dust of Dreams that just didn't make it work as much as some of the other philosophy-heavy novels in this book. And I felt like it was overly long, and it focused on things that, at least I, as a reader, going into the 9th book, didn't care for. I just thought it missed the mark entirely. So overall, I'm going to give it like a 6.5 out of 10. I think originally I gave this a 7 or a 7.5, but I gotta be honest, and the more I thought about it, the less I've enjoyed it, so I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. But there are some good aspects, and I don't blame anyone for enjoying this book. It just simply wasn't for me, And that's going to happen. That's going to happen. But overall, Dust of Dreams, it's a decent book. I wanted more from it that I didn't get. There are just some aspects that really grated me, but also it has some really great parts too. And I never want to be overly negative or focus on only the negatives. That's not fair, because there's a lot of good in Dust Dreams. So I just, want to put it out there that I didn't hate this book. I also just didn't really enjoy it. So 6.5 out of 10 overall.